The Carter mansion was said to have stopped breathing the day its mistress passed away. But this morning, inside that hollow shell of a house, a strange heartbeat stirred. The chandeliers still glowed, yet the warmth had long left the stone walls. There was no laughter, no music, only the echo of servants' footsteps. Suddenly, fate creaked open a hinge. Someone was about to shatter the silence. Noah and Ethan were twins born deaf, never once hearing their mother's lullaby. The day they entered the world was also the day Emily, their mother, left it forever. Since then, William Carter, the billionaire feared on Wall Street, had lived like a ghost, drifting past his children with a vacant gaze. He knew how to run an empire, but not how to hold grief. In his office, his signature could make stocks soar. Yet beneath the staircase, his sons sank like stones. His power reached the skies, but his hands missed the hearts within his own home. Doctors, specialists, therapists had come and gone, leaving behind charts, schedules, and declarations. The boys remained still as statues, eyes fixed on the floor, fingers clutching one another as if the world might slip away. Silence grew so thick, even the clock seemed to tick with exhaustion. William began to believe silence was destiny. Then one misty morning, Aaliyah Johnson arrived. Her resume was as thin as a notepad. Hardworking, reliable. No degrees, no accolades. William signed the contract without looking up. But Aaliyah saw what he never noticed. A gleaming kitchen as cold as a morgue. 2 children whose young eyes had already dulled from being unseen. She had grown up in a cramped apartment filled with songs, laughter, arguments, and reconciliations. For her, sound was life. Here, silence was a suspended sentence. At lunch, she set out 2 bowls of soup and bread, watching the frozen faces of the twins. A thought sparked. She could not let this house kill their childhood so politely. From her worn fabric bag, she pulled out a treasure carried for years, a scratched mini speaker. She hesitated, then pressed play. Aretha Franklin's voice filled the room, warm and rich, like a hand brushing the house's shoulder, like a breath forcing open rusted windows. The air trembled. Noah lifted his head, brows furrowed, lips moving as if asking something unseen. Ethan blinked, then tapped his heel against the chair, faint but deliberate. Aaliyah's heart raced. She left the music playing. She smiled, letting her body speak, hips swaying, shoulders rocking, hands sketching curves. "Come on, little men," she thought, knowing they could not hear the words, but could read her eyes. Ethan snorted a laugh, sliding off his chair, his shaky legs touching the floor. Noah hesitated, bit his lip, then followed. They touched rhythm in their own way, bodies swaying, palms slapping the table clumsily, their eyes sparking like sunlight piercing curtains. Aaliyah bent low, shaping the rhythm with her arms. She spun gently. Ethan copied, nearly falling. But she caught him and praised softly. Noah clapped, his uneven beat proud, like planting a flag on land wrested from darkness. Just then, the door swung open. William stepped in, papers still in hand. He froze as if brakes had slammed. Before him, the children he thought unreachable were stumbling, dancing around a maid. They were laughing. They were alive. The file slipped, papers scattering like startled birds. In his chest, an old sound returned, Emily humming softly at the oven. He wanted to speak, but his throat was dry. He had once bought companies with a single call. Now he could not buy his children's smiles, yet this unqualified girl had brought them forth with nothing more than a song and a dance. He stood at the threshold, his heart pounding like war drums. Aaliyah met his eyes, cautious, then softening. She did not stop the music. She bent low, lifted Ethan's chin, nodded toward Noah, turning the moment into a small ritual of courage. The boys glanced at their father, confused, then reassured, and they kept laughing. The wall of silence cracked audibly. Through its fissures, light seeped in, carrying footsteps and hope. The twist revealed itself. True power was not in contracts, but in the hands guiding two children out of the dark. The atmosphere in the Carter mansion the next morning was as heavy as fog. Though sunlight streamed through the vast glass windows, it could not chase away the quiet chill. William sat in his second-floor office, eyes fixed on papers he could not read, his mind replaying what he had seen the day before. Noah and Ethan spinning to music, laughing in the arms of the maid. He remembered that laughter clearly. It cut through him like a blade that was both sharp and sweet. Sweet because it was a sound he thought lost forever. Sharp because it had not come from him. A man powerful enough to command Wall Street stood powerless in his own home. The truth made him restless, angry, ashamed. A knock at the door pulled him back. In the kitchen, Aaliyah was preparing breakfast, the twins already seated, watching her every move. On the table, she laid out colorful wooden blocks, mixing them with spoons and bowls, turning mealtime into a game. For the first time, the boys reached forward, fumbling with the blocks, their eyes flickering with light. William entered, his voice cold. "Miss Johnson, I need to speak with you." The warmth in the kitchen faltered. Aaliyah set down the knife, wiped her hands on a cloth, and turned with calm eyes. "Yes, sir." Arms crossed, his words dropped heavy. "What you did yesterday with the children, it must not happen again." Aaliyah frowned, but did not flinch. "Do you mean the music? The laughter?" William's tone hardened. "That is not therapy. That is not science. They need discipline, treatment plans, not silly dances." Noah looked up, his gaze shifting between his father and Aaliyah. Ethan clutched her sleeve as if afraid his refuge would be taken away. Aaliyah drew a deep breath, her voice steady and low. "Sir, joy is never foolishness. It is what they are missing most." Silence fell, taut as a string about to snap. William's fists clenched, fury rising, but memories held him back. He recalled his son's eyes shining as he spun, tiny hands drumming along to rhythm. He could not deny it, though he hated to admit it. He turned away, his words biting. "You are overstepping." Aaliyah stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "I do not replace doctors. I do not reject therapy. But before anything else, I see children. They do not need data. They need connection." William's heart jolted, though he hid it. He was used to commanding, not being challenged. He inhaled sharply, ready to shout, when Noah's small laugh interrupted. The boy had placed a block on the table, smiling at Aaliyah, then clapped. Ethan copied him instantly. Both turned toward their father. William froze. In that moment, a father's pride trembled. He wanted to rush forward, to hold them, but his legs would not move. Aaliyah crouched beside the boys, her voice gentle. "Well done, you did it." Then she looked up at William. "Do you see? Joy does not break them. It saves them." William's throat closed. He swallowed his anger and left, his shadow stretching down the long hall. In his chest, a war had begun. Back in his office, he tried to bury himself in contracts, numbers dancing on the page, but all he could hear was the awkward, radiant laughter echoing. He hated the truth. A nameless maid had achieved what every expert had failed to do. That night, William sat alone, the glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. Emily's face returned in memory, her gentle smile, her soft voice. "You are too serious. she once said. Children need chaos, they need music. The ache of longing choked him, but with it came a fragile thread of hope, one he did not want to admit. In the next room, Aaliyah read her book, her fingers still smelling faintly of flour from dinner. Noah and Ethan slept peacefully, tiny smiles lingering in their dreams. She whispered to herself, I will not give up. They deserve happiness. Outside, William's storm raged on, but inside the first seed of a new battlefield had taken root. Not one of contracts and wealth, but of trust and heart. That night, William did not sleep. He sat in his office, the dim yellow lamp casting harsh shadows across his rigid face. Papers were scattered before him, numbers lined neatly on the page, but his eyes blurred. The only sound echoing in his head was not the scratch of his pen or the ring of a phone, but the tender laughter that had risen from the kitchen. Laughter he thought he would never hear again. He pressed a hand to his chest. His heart pounded, not for contracts, but for something far more dangerous. Hope. Hope had been his enemy since the day Emily died. It had promised, then betrayed. It had made him believe in miracles, only to destroy him again. He feared hope more than loneliness. The next morning, William descended the staircase, his cold gaze masking the turmoil inside. But what he saw stopped him in his tracks. Noah and Ethan were at the kitchen table, not silent as usual. They were tapping wooden blocks against the surface, uneven, imperfect, yet undeniably rhythmic. Aaliyah stood nearby, preparing breakfast while softly humming a familiar tune, her lips moving in song. The boys watched her, their eyes alight, their small hands striking the table eagerly in time with her cues. William's chest tightened. The image was too real to deny. Yet instead of stepping closer, he raised his old walls, his jaw clenched, his voice sharp. Miss Johnson. She looked up, her eyes calm yet piercing. Yes, Mr. Carter? William drew a breath. I told you before. They don't need improvisation. They need structure, treatment, not clumsy singing in a kitchen. Aaliyah set down her knife, wiped her hands. Her voice was gentle but firm. Then why, after years of therapy, are they still silent? And today, as you can see, they are tapping rhythm, smiling, looking at me, and for the first time, looking at each other. That is not play. That is life. William's words caught. He wanted to deny her. But the scene before him silenced every rebuttal. He forced his weakness into anger. You are giving them, and me, illusions. Aaliyah stepped closer, unwavering. No, sir. I am giving them the one thing no doctor can prescribe. Faith. If you want to call it illusion, so be it. But I have seen their eyes. They are no longer stone. They are returning. The air stretched taut, so tense it could snap. William turned away, afraid that if he looked longer, he would collapse. He strode out of the kitchen, yet every word of hers carved into the walls he had built around his pain. All day, he buried himself in contracts, but the letters blurred. All he saw was the image of two small hands drumming wooden blocks, two pairs of eyes blazing with hope. That evening, when the mansion was quiet, William crept down the stairs. He had no plan to confront anyone, only to see with his own eyes. But the sight in the living room froze him once again. Noah and Ethan lay sprawled on the rug, while Aaliyah sat between them, turning socks into puppets, telling the story of Sir Green Sock and Princess Red Sock in a playful voice. The boys giggled, reaching, eyes wide with wonder. No specialist had ever made them respond this way. William gripped the banister, his chest heaving. He could not name what filled him, jealousy, shame, or simply the fear that he had missed too much. Aaliyah suddenly turned, catching his gaze. She said nothing, only gave a small nod, as if inviting him to join. William faltered, stepped back, and slipped into the dark. That night, he sat alone, his heart at war. The pride of steel clashed with the desperate hunger to hear his children laugh again. The billionaire's ego battled the emptiness of a father, and in that war, he lost. The next morning, he entered the kitchen, still wrapped in his armor of authority. But instead of scolding, his voice came hoarse. Miss Johnson, continue. I will observe. Aaliyah blinked, then smiled softly, enough to ease the air. Yes, sir. The twins looked at their father, their eyes filled with something new, curiosity mingled with hope. They said nothing, but their tiny hands waved as if to draw him closer. William stood rooted, not yet ready to tear away the armor he had carried for 3 years. But for the first time, he did not turn away. Inside the Carter kitchen, a silent battle sparked, reason and fear against a heart's longing. And in the hesitant flicker of William's gaze, Aaliyah saw the truth. No matter how high he built his walls, the cracks had already begun. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the Carter mansion began to change. No one declared it, but the heavy silence had been broken. In its place came fragments of laughter, the tapping of rhythms, and the awkward glances Noah and Ethan exchanged as they slowly came to life. William watched. He had not yet joined, but he no longer denied. Each night, after locking himself in his office, he found himself wandering the halls just to listen. To hear Aaliyah's playful voices with socks turned into puppets. To hear his children giggling. To hear the house he thought lifeless beating again with sound. But along with that came an old wound that never stopped aching. Emily. One afternoon, as Aaliyah tidied the living room, she noticed a dusty frame on a high shelf. Curious, she pulled it down. Inside was a woman radiant beside a younger William, their hands entwined, her eyes shining so brightly, the photo itself seemed warm. Emily. Aaliyah froze. She had never met her, but she understood instantly. This was the root of the pain, the ghost that haunted the house. Instead of returning the frame to its hiding place, she set it lower, at a child's eye level. It was instinct, born of knowing the children needed to see, to know her face. The next morning, Noah wandered through the living room and stopped. His gaze locked on the picture. His small hand trembled as it reached out to touch the glass. Ethan followed close behind, his round eyes fixed on the stranger who felt familiar. Noah drew a deep breath, then slowly raised his hand in a clumsy sign. Mama. Imperfect, imprecise, yet unmistakable. Aaliyah's chest tightened. She knelt beside them, her voice breaking. Yes, sweetheart. Mama. Ethan mimicked him, his fingers shaky but determined. They stood together, their small shoulders touching, eyes glistening. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around them, whispering, beautiful. That is your mother. At that moment, a harsh sound broke the air. William stood in the doorway, eyes locked on the sight of his sons, signing a word he had never taught them, directed toward the face of the woman he had tried to bury. For an instant, his lungs forgot how to breathe. He had hidden the photo high, believing concealment would shield them from pain. But now, watching them recognize, name, and claim her, he felt himself split in two. You don't understand anything, he barked, his voice hoarse. Noah flinched, but instead of stopping, he repeated the sign. Mama. Ethan followed, his eyes blazing. William's heart shattered. The walls he had built for 3 years collapsed at a single word. He stumbled forward, knees buckling beside his sons. His hand trembled as it touched their shoulders, his voice broken. "Yes, yes, that is your mother." For the first time since the funeral, William wept. No longer the iron businessman, no longer the proud billionaire, only a man who had lost his wife, and a father trembling as his children called out at Mama. Noah's face lit up, his small palm pressed against the glass as if reaching for her. Ethan leaned into his father's shoulder, muttering distorted sounds, but filled with meaning. William pulled them both into his arms, tears falling into their hair. Aaliyah stood silent, bearing witness. In that moment, she knew placing the picture within their reach had been right. It was not a cruel reminder of loss, but a bridge binding father and sons together. When William lifted his gaze, his eyes met Aaliyah's. He said nothing, but in that raw silence, she read an entire thank you. That night, after putting his sons to bed, William sat in the living room, his eyes fixed on the photograph. He whispered into the dark, "Emily, do you see? They remember you. They need you. And I do too." That night, the Carter mansion was no longer just a shelter for silence. It became a place where memories lived again, where truth was no longer buried, where pain blended with hope. The plot twist burned bright. William, the man who had fled his wife's memory, had his children bring Emily back, not as a ghost of the past, but as flesh and blood in their present. And from that moment, he understood. There could be no more hiding. His children needed their mother's memory to grow, and he needed it to find himself again. That night, William tossed and turned on the vast bed as moonlight spilled cold through the window. The image of his children signing Mama replayed endlessly in his mind. A sharp blade that cut him with pain, yet woke him with clarity. For 3 years he had locked himself inside an armor of denial, burying every memory of Emily, yet one hesitant gesture from tiny hands had shattered it all. He was afraid, but deep inside, he longed for more. The next morning, William found Aaliyah in the living room. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a notebook in front of her filled with rough sketches, hand signs, arrows pointing directions. Her lips moved silently as her fingers shaped symbols in the air. Beside her, Noah and Ethan watched intently, wide-eyed, waiting for something new. Aaliyah inhaled, then raised her hand. Slowly, she folded her fingers into shape. "Play." Her lips mouthed the word clearly. Noah frowned, trying to mimic her. His fingers shook, imperfect, but recognizable. Ethan giggled and hurried to copy. Aaliyah clapped softly, her eyes shining. "That's right. Play." William stood at the doorway, his heart pounding. He had never seen his sons respond so quickly. He had spent thousands on experts only to get silence and vacant stares. Yet here was a woman with no degree, opening a door into their world. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked, hoarse. Aaliyah looked up, calm and steady. "I'm learning sign language. If the world out there doesn't understand them, then at least in this house, they will have a voice." William froze. He wanted to dismiss her words, but they struck his pride like a hammer. He said nothing, only watched. Aaliyah lifted her hand again, moving gracefully. "Happy." Noah burst out laughing. Ethan eagerly followed, their eyes glowing as if they had discovered treasure. Her hands trembled slightly, but she pressed on, folding her arms against her chest, whispering, "Love." The air stilled. Ethan tried first, clumsy but unmistakable. Noah hesitated, then mirrored her, his smile bright as sunlight. Aaliyah nearly wept, but held it back, whispering praise. "Wonderful, my loves." "Love." William stood frozen, his chest clenched. Love was the word he had buried, the word that hurt too deeply to touch. Yet now, two small pairs of hands had brought it back. Aaliyah turned to him, her gaze gentle but daring. "You can try, too." Just one word. William faltered. His life had been built on commands and contracts, never on clumsy gestures. But his children's eyes were locked on him, filled with longing. His chest tightened until he could hardly breathe. At last, he lifted his hand, trembling, and copied the motion. His lips moved, his voice breaking. "Papa." In that instant, the room exploded with light. Noah's jaw dropped. Then he laughed, his tiny hands repeating the sign. "Papa!" Ethan squealed with joy, hurling himself against his father's arm. William collapsed to his knees, gathering them into his arms. Tears streamed down his face, soaking their messy hair. His voice cracked. "Papa's here. Papa's always here." Aaliyah pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, her eyes overflowing with emotion. William lifted his gaze to her, and there was no ice left, only gratitude so raw it shook him. "Thank you," he whispered. Aaliyah shook her head gently, a soft smile on her lips. "Don't thank me. Thank them. Because they chose you." Noah and Ethan kept laughing, their clumsy little hands signing Papa again and again. And to William, it was the most beautiful music he had ever heard, though no sound filled the air. In a mansion once buried in silence, a single word had awakened the world. And the final twist revealed itself. The man who believed he had lost the right to be a father finally realized he still carried the greatest power. Power not in wealth or reputation, but in two simple syllables: Papa. That morning, the atmosphere in the Carter mansion was taut as a drawn string. William had risen before dawn, his shirt crisp, but his hands trembled slightly as he knotted his tie. Today, Dr. Harold Stein was coming, the specialist who had followed Noah and Ethan since the day they were born. For William, it was both a chance to prove his children had made progress and a nightmare that could destroy the fragile hope Aaliyah had planted in his heart. The living room was bright, the chairs neatly aligned. Aaliyah sat beside the boys, patiently guiding them to stack wooden blocks. Noah tapped the table awkwardly. Ethan giggled softly. William stood nearby, feigning calm, but every step he took felt like walking through fire. At exactly 10, Harold Stein arrived. He carried his familiar air, gray coat, leather briefcase, a small notebook in hand. His handshake with William was short and cold. "Let us see how they are today," Stein said evenly. William sat close to his sons, his voice husky with nerves. "Noah, Ethan, show the doctor. Sign Papa." Noah lifted his hand. He tried to make the familiar sign, but the moment he caught Stein's stern gaze, his small hand trembled and fell. Ethan pressed against Aaliyah, clutching her shirt in fear. William froze. He forced a smile, urging desperately, "It's all right. Do it again. Papa. Children, Papa." But the more he pushed, the more Noah shook his head. Lips pressed tight. Ethan buried his face in Aaliyah's shoulder, his body rigid. Silence smothered the room. Stein scribbled a note, then looked up. "William, I must be honest. Children can mimic gestures while playing, but that does not equal language ability. I see no lasting signs." "No." William erupted, his voice breaking. "You don't understand." They laughed. They called me Papa. They've changed. I saw it with my own eyes. Stein shook his head, calm but detached. "Emotion is not scientific proof. You must be careful. False hope can destroy you and them." Each word fell like a hammer. William turned to his sons, but saw only their frightened eyes, their trembling bodies. The happiness of past days crumbled instantly. Humiliation and anger flared. He spun toward Aaliyah. "You!" he roared, his voice like a blade. "You made them laugh. You made them copy. You made me believe they had changed. And today, before the doctor, it all collapsed. You gave me false hope." Aaliyah froze, then her eyes blazed. She clutched the boys tight, her voice steady. "Hope is never false, Mr. Carter. It is the only thing keeping them alive in this cold house. You want data? Charts. They are children, not a project for your reports." Noah clung to her waist. Ethan sobbed into her chest. William faltered, but his pride refused retreat. "You overstep. I hired you to keep this house, not to play savior." The words struck like a slap, but Aaliyah did not lower her voice. "I don't need to be a savior. I only need them to live as children should. If you don't believe, then I will. Alone, if I must." The room froze. Stein stayed silent, avoiding interference. William's breath came ragged, his fists clenched, his eyes torn with conflict. But he could say no more. Aaliyah bent to whisper to the children. "It's all right. I am here." Then she lifted her gaze at William. "You may refuse, but you cannot take away the faith already burning in their hearts. It is stronger than your fear." William turned and left. Each step weighted like a mountain. The living room door shut behind him, leaving an icy void. That night, the mansion held no laughter. Aaliyah sat by the children's bed, soothing them as their wide eyes lingered with worry. William locked himself in his office, a bottle half empty, his eyes hollow. He knew he had just shattered the most fragile thing he had: trust. The plot twist closed in. William believed clinging to logic and evidence would protect his children. But it was he who wounded them. And Aaliyah, dismissed in his eyes as just a maid, proved that true power did not lie in medical reports, but in the faith that nourishes the hearts of children. After the fateful evaluation, the Carter mansion sank into a freezing silence. No more playful rhythms, no more innocent laughter echoing down the halls. Only a heavy stillness remained, as if a massive tomb had fallen over the house. William locked himself in his office, buried under papers he could not read. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of his children shrinking from him as he shouted. He hated himself, but cruel pride kept him silent. Instead of an apology, he poured whiskey, letting the bitterness tear at his throat. Aaliyah grew quieter than ever. She still cared for Noah and Ethan, but she no longer sang, no longer smiled. Her steps were soft, her voice low, her eyes weary. The children sensed the change immediately. They clung to her, their eyes full of confusion, as if afraid she too would abandon them. Noah often sat frozen, clutching his old wooden block. Ethan looked at his brother, then at Aaliyah, his lips trembling as if to call out, but falling silent. Their young hearts understood. Something precious had been lost. One evening, after a dinner smothered in silence, Noah noticed Aaliyah's bag on a chair. From its opening peeked the familiar small speaker. His eyes lit up. He slipped off his seat, pulled it free, and set it on the floor. Ethan rushed to him curiously, waiting. Noah pressed the button. A tune filled the air, distorted but recognizable. The same song that once turned the cold kitchen into a stage of warmth. Ethan giggled, stomping his tiny feet to the beat. Noah spun clumsily, but with determination. Aaliyah froze, her heart heavy. She feared William would hear, would remember his rage, and everything would shatter again. But Noah and Ethan's eyes looked up at her, shimmering with hope, calling her into the circle they had rebuilt. Ethan clapped wildly, his mouth bursting with pure laughter. Noah reached out his small hand, pleading, "Come with us." Aaliyah drew a deep breath. Doubt vanished. She bent down, spun with him, clapped, stomped the floor hard so the sound rang through the kitchen. Instantly, laughter erupted. Ethan tumbled, then sprang up, laughing uncontrollably. Noah clapped in rhythm, his smile radiant. Aaliyah twirled, her hair loose, her laughter joining theirs, warm and full. The kitchen, once frozen, came alive. Footsteps echoed in the hall. "William." He stopped at the doorway, eyes wide. Before him was a scene he thought lost forever. His children dancing, clinging to Aaliyah, their laughter rising together. His chest tightened painfully. He wanted to turn away, but then Noah caught his gaze. The boy raised his hand, signing shakily, "Dance, Papa." Ethan immediately copied, waving his arms, his mouth forming broken but clear sounds. "Papa." William froze. He was used to refusing, used to standing apart. But this time, his children's eyes did not look away. They burned with expectation. He stepped forward, then stopped. A voice hissed in his head, "You'll look ridiculous. You'll fail them." But the memory of Noah and Ethan trembling in fear cut through him like a blade. He exhaled. William lifted his foot, stepped closer, raised his arms slowly, stomping clumsily, swaying awkwardly. The moment ignited cheers. Noah shouted with joy, running to seize his father's hand. Ethan lunged forward, pulling him into their circle. William laughed, a rough, trembling sound, but real, the laugh of a father. He spun clumsily, nearly stumbling, but his children's laughter held him steady. He bent low, pulling them tight, his voice breaking. "Papa's here. Papa will never leave you again." Aaliyah stood watching, her hand over her heart. Tears rolling down her cheeks, her smile radiant. William lifted his gaze, meeting hers. In that instant, no anger, no distance remained. Only deep gratitude, wordless but powerful. The kitchen glowed with music, laughter, and the strength of arms locked together. And the final plot twist revealed itself. William had believed he lost the right to be a father. But it was Noah and Ethan, the children once trapped in silence, who pulled him back with the simplest invitation. "Dance, Papa." And for the first time, he did not turn away. That night, the Carter mansion lay under a heavy veil of darkness, the tall windows glowing with a faint golden light like a silent stream of memory. Upstairs, Noah and Ethan slept soundly, their small faces serene, their lips curved, as if holding on to smiles that had not yet faded. But in the living room, William remained awake. He sat motionless in a wide armchair, his figure blending into the shadows, a dusty wooden box before him. Aaliyah stepped out from the kitchen, her hands still carrying the faint scent of soap. She intended to whisper a good night and leave, but William's eyes stopped her. They were both hard and broken, like a man holding both the abyss and a flame. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside were the memories he had long avoided: faded photographs, a tarnished silver necklace, a stack of yellowed envelopes. He drew out one letter, its thin paper wrinkled, edges worn as if crumpled and smoothed countless times. "This," William's voice rasped, "is the last letter I wrote to Emily. But I never gave it to her." Aaliyah sat across from him, silent. William drew a deep breath, his trembling hands unfolding the page. In the suffocating stillness, he began to read, each word bleeding from his heart. "Emily, I know I was never a gentle husband. I thought if I secured our future, you would be happy. But I was wrong. You needed me present. You needed laughter. You needed warmth. I wanted to change. I wanted to raise our children with you in joy, not in heavy silence. If you are reading this, it means I finally found the courage to admit it before it is too late. I love you. Always." His voice broke on the final words. His fingers clenched the page, a tear falling and smudging the faded ink. He whispered, "I failed her. She died never knowing I wanted to be different." Aaliyah's chest ached. In his eyes, she saw not only grief for his wife, but also the sentence he had condemned himself to. She inhaled, then spoke, her voice soft yet sharp. "That promise never died, William. It lives in Noah and Ethan. They are where your love with Emily continues." William looked up, eyes red, his voice fractured. "But what if I fail again? I fear I'll only hurt them more." Aaliyah shook her head, her gaze steady, her words anchoring him. "Failure is not when you stumble. Failure is when you give up. Today you laughed with them, you danced with them. That was no illusion. That was a beginning." Silence fell, the ticking clock marking each word. William stared at the letter, then toward the staircase where his sons lay asleep. His chest swelled with pain, but also with release. Slowly, he handed the letter to Aaliyah. "Keep this. If I lose my way again, read it to me. Remind me that I once promised." Aaliyah accepted, her hand trembling. She nodded, her voice low but firm. "I will keep it. But more importantly, you must keep it with yourself." In that moment, their eyes met. William no longer saw just a maid. He saw an ally, a steady light, someone who dared walk into the dark with him and refused to let him fall. He exhaled, his voice hoarse. "If Emily were here, she would tell me to believe in hope." Aaliyah said nothing. She placed her hand gently on the lid of the wooden box, as if sending a silent vow to the woman in the photograph. Memories would no longer be locked in silence. That night, the Carter mansion no longer felt like a tomb. It became a place where memory and present intertwined, where a letter never delivered found new meaning. In that tender stillness, two people sat across from each other, and between them, a new current of life began to flow, filling the void once thought unhealable. Morning came with heavy clouds blanketing the sky. The Carter mansion lay under a pale light, mirroring the heart of its master. William had been in his study since dawn, his hands clasped tightly over a thick folder filled with Noah and Ethan's medical records. Today, Dr. Harold Stein, who had monitored the twins since birth, would arrive. He drew a deep breath, but the tightness in his chest remained. All night he had replayed the sound of their laughter, their clumsy dance steps, their radiant eyes. Yet fear cut into him. What if it had all been an illusion? What if, under Stein's gaze, everything dissolved into cold numbers and merciless verdicts? In the kitchen, Aaliyah set breakfast and noticed the strain in William's face. She whispered, "You saw it yourself, William. They will show more. Believe in that." His reply was curt, his voice rough. "We will see." The doorbell rang like a hammer. William opened it. Harold Stein stepped in, his calm face carrying the cold eyes of a man used to observing rather than sharing. He wore a dark suit, a notebook in hand. In the living room, Noah and Ethan sat side by side, their small hands twisted together. Aaliyah stayed close, her gaze encouraging. William stood behind them, his heartbeat racing. Stein sat, his voice steady and low. "Hello, boys. Mr. Carter, please show me the progress you mentioned." William knelt by his sons, forcing a smile. "Noah, do you remember?" "Papa." "Say it with your hands, son." "Papa." Noah moved slightly. But when his eyes met Stein's cold scrutiny, his hand shook and fell. Ethan clung to Aaliyah's shirt, burying his face in her shoulder. The room grew heavy as stone. Panic flared in William's voice. "It's all right. Do it again. Show the doctor. Papa, remember?" No response. The boys only shrank further. Stein wrote briefly, then looked up. "I see no clear improvement. Children may mimic gestures during play, but that does not equal sustained communication. Reaction to music or games does not confirm language or cognitive ability." William flushed red, rising sharply. "No. You didn't see them laugh, didn't see their eyes? They have changed. They are different now." Stein's tone remained calm, detached. Positive emotion is not medical evidence. If you mistake it for progress, you will build false hope. And false hope is more dangerous than the condition itself. Each word struck like a blade. William turned and saw his sons cowering, clutching Aaliyah's dress. Shame and anger surged through him. His voice cracked but thundered, "This is your fault." The room froze. Aaliyah looked up, her eyes pained. "My fault?" William stepped closer, fists clenched. "You made them dance, laugh, mimic, made me believe a miracle had come. And in front of the doctor, it all collapsed. Don't you see? You gave me false hope." The children burst into tears, clinging to Aaliyah. She bent to hold them, then raised her head, her voice trembling yet unyielding. "Hope is never false, William. It is what makes them alive. Without it, they would drown in silence forever." William faltered. He wanted to argue, but the memory of their laughter crashed against her words. His heart tore between fear of failure and the longing to believe. Stein closed his notebook and stood. "I will continue monitoring, but my conclusion stands. You should rely on professional therapy, not vague illusions. Good luck." The door shut behind him, leaving the air heavier still. William stood frozen, his back burdened with stone. Aaliyah lifted Ethan into her arms, while Noah gripped her hand, his frightened eyes on his father. Her voice rose, not loud but sharp. "I have no degree, no title. But I see what you are afraid to see, the light in their eyes. If you turn away, they will lose it. I will not let that happen." William swallowed hard, his hands shaking. He said nothing. But in his eyes, a battle had begun, between cold science and fragile faith. Between fear that dragged him back and hope demanding to live. That night, the Carter mansion fell into silence again. But it was no longer the silence of death. It was a tense stillness, where a great decision was forming, waiting to be spoken. That morning, the sky outside the window was crystal clear. But William Carter's heart felt unbearably heavy. He had not slept all night. The ticking of the clock in the library struck each hollow beat, mingling with the relentless storm of his thoughts. Every word from Dr. Stein still echoed, cold and final like a sentence. Do not mistake a moving moment for true progress. William sat at the wooden desk, his large hands clenched until they turned white. He wondered if he was feeding a cruel illusion. Yet the memory of Noah's crooked smile, Ethan's tentative clap, and the moment Aaliyah reached out to guide the boys into rhythm all rushed back. They were no illusion. They were alive, as real as the pounding in his chest. When he stepped into the dining room that morning, he stopped short. Breakfast was set on the table. Aaliyah stood quietly, and the two boys sat waiting, their clear eyes fixed on him, filled with both hope and hesitation. The air felt frozen. William drew a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." Aaliyah met his gaze, calm but piercing. William braced his hands on the table, his shoulders trembling. I saw what Stein did not. I saw my sons laugh. I saw them reach for me. I saw life flare in their eyes. And I know you opened that door. Aaliyah shook her head gently. I did no miracle. They stepped out of the shadows on their own. I only gave them rhythm, and they chose to listen. William lowered his head, his voice breaking. And I nearly locked that door forever. Noah suddenly reached out, his small hand brushing his father's arm. William froze. He laid his hand over it, trembling like a child touching something sacred. Ethan tapped the table with a faint smile on his lips. William laughed through his tears. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable before them. But the world outside would not wait for him to heal. Rumors about the Carter family spread, fueling doubt. Some shareholders immediately demanded a meeting. Pressure bore down like a storm. That afternoon, in the vast living room, an emergency meeting was held. Experienced faces, men who had once stood with him in triumph, now stared with cold scrutiny. A silver-haired man spoke heavily. Mr. Carter, we sympathize with your grief, but hope cannot replace truth. If you let emotion guide you, this corporation will collapse. The air was suffocating. William stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the long table. At the door, Aaliyah entered with the twins. Noah and Ethan clung tightly to her hands, but their eyes shone bright. William saw them, and a fire ignited in his chest. His voice struck like iron. You are right. Hope cannot replace truth. But you forget. Truth is not written only in numbers. The truth I see is that these boys are no longer lost in darkness. They are living. They are laughing. They are reaching out. And I will not turn my back on that. Murmurs rose, but William pressed on, his voice stronger with each word. When I built Carter Group, people called it an illusion. If I had believed them, none of us would be here. Today, I place that same faith in my family. Whoever cannot accept it, the door is open. Silence engulfed the room. At last, the silver-haired man gave a slight nod. None of the others dared object. Aaliyah looked at William, stunned and moved. At the door, the boys clapped their small hands awkwardly. William saw it and, for the first time, smiled without restraint. When everyone else had gone, he remained seated. Aaliyah approached and laid Emily's old letter on the table. William's hands shook as he picked it up, his eyes blurring with tears. He looked up into Aaliyah's gentle gaze. No words were needed, for understanding had already passed between them. That night, William held his sons in his arms. Their young laughter blended with his ragged breaths. For the first time in years, the Carter mansion glowed with warmth. It was no longer just walls of cold stone guarding grief. It had become a true home where life had returned. There are houses that once overflowed with laughter, only to be covered by a thick fog of time, loss, and pain. The Carter family was no exception. Yet in that seemingly endless darkness, a small light, born from patience, from love, and from faith, opened a new path. This story reminds us that no sorrow can ever completely extinguish hope, and sometimes all it takes is an outstretched hand, a warm rhythm, to awaken the life that has been asleep for too long. Perhaps each of us has faced days that felt impossible to overcome. But remember, change does not always begin with grand gestures. It can start with a smile, a glance, a single act powerful enough to melt the ice around a heart. True strength does not lie in status or wealth, but in the ability to truly see people, with all their fragility and flaws, yet also with their boundless potential to rise again. If this story touched you, give it a chance to spread. Press like, subscribe, and share this video with those who may need a little light in their lives. Who knows, the message of hope and love may become the very door someone needs to walk through. Just as Aaliyah opened one for Noah and Ethan. We believe every story has the power to heal a heart. And you, through your presence and support, are a part of that journey.